Joanne Mariner is the Terrorism and Counterterrorism Program Director at Human Rights Watch. A graduate of Yale Law School, Joanne clerked for the Ninth Circuit Federal Court of Appeals before joining Human Rights Watch in 1994. She has documented war crimes in Colombia, Kosovo, and Darfur, has briefed members of Congress, and conducted advocacy before UN bodies on human rights issues. Let me tell you something about Joanne, that this isn't your standard ivory tower research person. She spends half her life in New York and half her life in Paris. When she's in Paris, she uses that as a base to travel through the Middle East, through Africa, doing hands-on research on human rights abuses. She told me a while back that she and a couple of her associates actually were in Darfur, spent a week or two camping out in the desert with the rebels to make sure that their research got it right. She also, when she's here in New York, she uses that as a base for traveling in Colombia, Latin America, to document human rights abuses there. She's written this fantastic expose that's available on the internet on rape in prisons, where she actually went into the prisons across the country, conducted extensive surveys, personal interviews with the most violent of criminals in order to document this enormous scandal in American prisons involving rape of prisoners. She is fluent in both Spanish and French, and one of the websites I go to every day is findlaw.com. And they have a lot of good articles there, but the primary reason I go to that article is that website is because Joanne writes an article for FindLaw every month, and I can't wait for that article. She writes so clearly and so succinctly. If you want to learn everything there is to know in just regular, average, non-lawyer language about rendition, CIA, kidnapping, Guantanamo, torture, go to findlaw.com. Access Joanne's archives and read all the articles that she has written on those issues. The title of her talk today is The CIA's Detention, Interrogation, and Rendition Program. Please welcome Joanne Mariner.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. I'm going to speak about, as Jacob said, or Bumper said, the Detention, Interrogation, and Rendition Program run by the CIA since September 11th. The story I'm going to tell is really, in some crucial respects, very similar to the story that Daniel Ellsberg told yesterday. It's a story of secrecy, gross wrongdoing, and the raw exercise of government power. I think, from what I understand about libertarianism, it could be conceived of as the utter negation of libertarian ideals of individual freedom and autonomy. Persons in CIA custody have been disappeared, stolen from their families, held in secret prisons, and subject to a range of physical and psychological abuses, including torture. It's a story of unlimited executive power, untrammeled by law or custom, not subject to congressional oversight, and free of any judicial supervision. As I'll describe, the only traditional democratic safeguard that is held up over the past 5 years in terms of constraining the CIA in any way has been the press. Before I jump into my narrative, I need to actually define a few terms for you to give you a kind of a glossary, if you will, for understanding the CIA program. The first term, torture, may not seem like it would need definition. We all know what torture is, right? Well, no. The Bush administration, having embraced the practice of torture, but not the word, has found it necessary to redefine torture in ways that, their use of the word wouldn't be recognizable to the average person. Whereas in common parlance and international law understand torture as a practice that causes severe pain or suffering, the Bush administration in August 2002 issued a memo, a legal opinion, that defined torture so narrowly that only activities, and I quote, resulting in death, organ failure, or the permanent impairment of a significant body function were held to be torture punishable by law. That definition does not coincide with any reasonable definition of what torture is, but it's been very effective in terms of allowing the Bush administration to say, we don't torture. Well, we don't necessarily commit practices that cause organ failure or death, but we do commit practices that cause severe pain and suffering, which most people would recognize as torture. This definition was later revoked by the administration, but the underlying problem of redefining torture so that US practices aren't covered has remained consistent. A few more related terms that you need to understand in order to grasp what has been going on in the area of counterterrorism since September 11th. One is alternative interrogation methods. Another is enhanced interrogation techniques, also known as classified methods and activities. What are all these terms? These terms are euphemisms. These terms are words that the president and other high officials use in order to not say torture. The government would be ashamed to admit it uses torture. The word has a lot of stigma, but it's quite proud to say that it uses alternative methods and techniques against suspected terrorists. It's a sort of wink-wink, nudge-nudge approach that we all know from Monty Python. So what are these alternative methods? Well, they range from long-term sleep deprivation, which, many people, I've even had discussions with friends, they have a hard time understanding how could long-term sleep deprivation be a problem. We've all pulled overnighters studying for exams or something. Well, that's not the kind of sleep deprivation I'm talking about. I'm talking about keeping people awake for up to a week. This is the kind of sleep deprivation that in fact was used under Stalin quite effectively and has been used by oppressive regimes all over the world. Another abuse is the simple one of violent beatings. Detainees have had their arms broken in custody, have had beaten up in really many traditional ways. A final term that we should become familiar with is waterboarding, which is the most extreme of the techniques used by the administration. Waterboarding is essentially mock drowning, but it is not just making the detainee believe he's going to drown, it makes him feel like he's drowning. So it is the sensation of drowning, and try to imagine what that is like. That is torture. The US has long considered this practice to be torture and a war crime. And in fact, as early as 1901, a US court-martial sentenced an American military officer to 10 years of hard labor for using this technique against a suspected insurgent in the Philippines. After World War II, US military commissions successfully prosecuted a number of Japanese soldiers as war criminals because they had used this technique against American soldiers. After the Vietnam War, a US Army officer was prosecuted, court-martialed, and convicted in 1968 for helping to waterboard a prisoner in Vietnam. So past administrations, over the past century have considered waterboarding to be torture. But under this administration, official views on waterboarding have changed quite dramatically. In fact, asked about the practice in March 2005, then CIA Director Porter Goss told Congress that waterboarding was, I quote, a professional interrogation technique. So let's go back to September 2001. As Cofer Black, then CIA head of counterterrorism, put it, there was a before 9/11 and an after 9/11. After 9/11, the gloves came off. What does that mean? Well, what it meant concretely was that on September 17th, 2001, the president signed a classified directive that authorized the CIA to detain and interrogate suspected terrorists outside of any traditional legal framework. The public, of course, did not learn of this directive at the time. In fact, it was only last year when, as you may recall, the president announced or revealed the existence of the CIA program that the existence of the directive also had to be acknowledged.